All right, let's go ahead and get started. I think we have critical mass and enough folks to kick this off. So first item that I wanted to talk about today was the FIP10 gateway migration. So just to actually, if Horsefax is here, I'll kind of let him talk over this. Otherwise, I'll give the quick update. Looks like he might still be connecting. So let me get started here. So FIP10, just to recap what we did, it's a series of improvements that make it easier to read events from contracts. So one of the big challenges was the sort of thing that triggered this FIP was we saw that some users or a couple of folks had registered like thousands of FIDs without renting storage. And the downstream effects of that were a lot of developers had hooked up their apps to create rows in their database table when this happened because it's an important event. And that just created a lot of pain for everybody. Now, we could have worked around this. We could have said like, hey, every developer, you have to like follow these rules and check the storage contract and the ID contract. But it was just adding a lot of complexity. So we stepped back and rethought like our event strategy and said like, hey, how do we want developers to be able to consume events? And so we brought out two sort of rule changes. The first one is we've said that for important events, which you want to track in your database, like adding an FID or adding a key or signer to the key registry, we said that we're going to apply some limits to this. So for the FID, you have to actually always acquire storage now. So it costs $7, so it prevents someone from just creating, millions of these for a few $100,000. We also said that for signers, there's a limit of 1,000 signers per user. You can remove signers and add more to stay under that limit, but at any time you can have about 1,000 connected applications. This can be changed in the future by an admin. We thought 1,000 was just well beyond what anyone uses right now, but if we're wrong and we need to make this 10,000, that's also totally configurable by an admin in the future. But these two changes make it so that these core events that people care about, you're not going to be able to go in and just spam these events. Second thing that we call out for people running replicators and running hubs, it is still possible to spam some other kinds of events. For example, you can spam transfers if you wanted to. So you can take an FID, transfer it back and forth 1,000 times, and that would still generate a bunch of events. The reason that's a lot less painful is unlike FIDs, you don't care about tracking all of the state changes. You only usually care about the last one. And so you can take the hack of just reading the most recent event and storing that in your database and always updating it. So this still won't cause a lot of database bloat when these kinds of things happen. So that's the new paradigm. The other sort of meta change that we made with gateways was we said, hey, we may want to make changes to these rules in futures for these like what we call important events. Important events are ones where someone enters and owns something, either owning a new ID or owning a new key. And so we added this gateway pattern where there's an intermediary contract that defines the rules for entering the system. But once you're in, everything is governed by the old registry contract. So the nice thing about this is this lets the Farcaster protocol team change the rules of entering the system, but doesn't give us any ability to change the rules of how ownership works once you've entered the system. So we can go and change the rules for, hey, now you have to buy 2 storage units to get in or something like that. But once you own an FID, there's nothing that we or any of the contract owners can do to take that FID away from you. So it strikes a nice balance between decentralized ownership, but giving us the flexibility to change these rules again in the future. Okay, so that's the set of changes we made. We had to do a one-time redeployment and remigration of all the contracts to make this happen. So on Tuesday, we deployed the new set of contracts that were audited by 2 different firms. We migrated all the data, cut over all the hubs, and everything seems to be working well. The one issue we've noticed is the v1.7 hubs are slow to pick up contract events. I know Manan reported this a little more upstream in the replicator. So Sanjay is actively working on a fix for that. We don't have an ETA yet, but it's our top priority right now. If you're seeing any other issues or have any other problems about this contract, we'd love to know as quickly as possible. So far, we've had no other reports, and this is the only thing that we're aware of that's not working right now. Okay, I'll pause here if anyone has any questions about the general FIP that we should recap, or if anyone has any bugs or things they'd like to flag. Okay, cool. I'll keep rolling. The next update.
One question. Was this a call for general bugs or specific to the migration?
Specific to the migration, but if you do have a general bug you want to throw out, I'd love to hear it.
We have a couple of tickets on monorepo, GitHub monorepo, Hub monorepo. It's more about like the follow count being inconsistent and there being a difference between the Warpcast follow count and Hub follow count, as well as a difference between follow count on two hubs.
Cool.
So
If you wouldn't
yeah.
mind dropping the link in the Zoom chat, or you can DM it to me later, I'll make sure we prioritize those two events. The one I'll segue to talk about one other Warpcast related bug that we're aware of right now. There are about 20 users for whom the signers that Warpcast set up were not able to broadcast messages correctly. And we are working on a fix for them. So right now their messages show up in Warpcast, but they're not actually getting successfully broadcast to the hubs. That's a bug on Warpcast side, and we're working on fixing them. The fix will likely be slow because these users have to come back online and re-sign a new signer before this will actually work. So it may not resolve quickly, but we think it's contained. We don't see this happening for new accounts signing up. So it looks like something that happened in the past caused this little blip that we're working on fixing. Thanks for sharing those links, Manat. We'll take a look at them. Cool. The next thing I wanted to talk about is we have an upcoming protocol release. So we do these every 6 weeks, and the next one is coming up on November 15th. Besides FIP 10, we expect no major updates. There will be a new release of Hubble pushed out. It's going to be v1.8. It's going to do the same 2-week, everyone has to upgrade or it'll expire. But it's largely just going to contain FIP 10, and there's going to be no other major updates. So if you have the auto updater turned on in Hubble, you will auto update into this. If you don't have the auto updater turned on and you update your hubs manually, you'll have to update in 2 weeks or your hubs will auto shut off. And we'll keep rolling forward. And I'm sure Dan will make us a new NFT with a cute animal photo when the time is right. Cool. Replicator, we've made a little bit of progress, but honestly, because of the gateway migration, we haven't made as much progress as we would like. So I don't know if we've resolved any like major outstanding issues. The one ask is if you have an issue and it's not in GitHub, if you could throw it in GitHub, that would make it much more easy for us to stay on top of these issues. So if there's something that's broken and it's not tracked in GitHub, please throw it on there and we'll make sure we're prioritizing it. If anyone has any replicator issues they just want to flag or ask about openly, we'd love to hear about it now if you want to just step up or paste it in chat. Horsefacts, I touched on the gateway migration stuff earlier when we kicked off the call. Is there anything you wanted to add to the stuff that I covered?
No, I don't think so. If you're a developer, there's a guide in the FIP doc around what you might need to change as a developer. The big things are that we have new contract addresses, so your signature domain separators have changed. You'll need to use those for the new signatures that you're generating. And the other big one is that change recovery addresses signature has slightly changed. We actually require you to put the old recovery in that signature and the new recovery now, which is a little safer for folks who are changing their recovery address by signature.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great call out. There's this little Appendix 8 cheat sheet at the bottom, which just basically summarizes all the little things that have changed. So you can kind of glance over this, and if you see yourself using any of these methods, it'll tell you kind of what the new methods are to make that that upgrade easy.
Yeah. I guess I'd also call out, we have a custody of reverse mapping on IDs now, which hopefully people will be excited about and use. So you can now, you used to have to go get events to figure out what the current custody by FID was, but that's easy to look up at the contract level now.
Yep. Great. And then, so I think that covers it on the replicator. Horsefacts, do you want to talk about Farcaster Connect?
Yeah, so this has been pretty backburnered for me for the past 3 or 4 weeks as we've been working on FIP 10. Yeah, the next component of this that's coming is I think going to be some new modules in Hub.js that will handle verification of sign in with Farcaster messages. So using that message spec that's in, I guess it's now the FIP 11 spec for Farcaster Connect message. So that's like the CUA message with some extra attributes that specify the FID of the user and certain Farcaster resources that you want to load. So that component of this is built out. I think that will land in Hub.js somewhat soon. And then we are thinking about the broader design of this a bit. I think so our initial spec in FIP 11 was using protocol handlers. We've seen a lot of trouble with folks using those on Android and elsewhere. So I think we're rethinking a bit whether we want to use that as the foundation of building this out, and thinking maybe doing something more like a stateful kind of sync channel, which will be a better DX where you get you can pull and get feedback on the state of your transaction at any point. So next step for me is to probably go back a little bit and spec that and update where that is. But I also want to ship this individual component into the Hub.js library that lets us start verifying Farcaster Connect messages.
Yeah. And one ask from folks has been, what's the timeline on this? And it's been a little hard for two reasons. One is the team's been working on the gateway migration, so that's been taking up a lot of our time. Two is we're still prototyping. I think we're trying to create things and test whether they work and then throwing things away and redoing them like the protocol handlers. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Like roughly, we're really hoping to get this out by the end of the year. If all goes well, it'll hopefully be a lot sooner than that, but we don't have a definite timeline right now. And hopefully we'll have a better update for you by the next dev call. Cool. Want to open it up before we go into Warpcast specific stuff. Want to open it up for any general Farcaster questions or topics that people wanted to surface. You can either paste them in the chat and I'll follow along, or or you can just step up and talk.
Maybe one thing to address, we had something that came up this week, I think in the dev chat, and then it kind of spilled over onto Farcaster. We don't necessarily have to get into the details, but one thing I just always want to encourage people is I hear this feedback of like, oh, I get private DMs of people frustrated, but they're too afraid, or you guys are not receptive to feedback. And I just want to kind of make sure that everyone on this call, and I know some of you are actually very vocal in terms of feedback, which is always appreciated. But like, you should feel free to DM me or Varun, and usually Varun on this kind of topic, and we're happy to engage. So and we can do it publicly too. But like, I want to make sure that, like, to be very clear, there is no version of, if we respond to someone publicly, especially if there's like kind of a behavior thing that's going on and we're kind of taking a public stance, like you should always feel free to just reach out to us and express frustration, gratitude, whatever emotion you want. Because I think like the only way we can improve and think about what should be a priority is getting honest feedback.
Greg wants to start a petition to ban cast with WoW at the protocol level. Greg, if you write the FIP, we'll put it through our usual review process, and we'll see if we can get that passed. Cool. If there's nothing else, we'll flip over to the Warpcast side of things. So we've got a couple of exciting updates. Cassie, if you're here, do you want to give the quick updates on the passkey stuff you've been working on?
Yeah, so passkey's really straightforward, especially on web. There's no esoteric Apple APIs to deal with. So web passkeys is coming soon, and it'll enable support for being able to log in, log out, and also log in, log out to multiple accounts. So if you liked the experience on Warpcast Mobile, that same experience is coming to web. There is one caveat I should point out. Passkeys with large blob is not supported on Firefox, any version.
Yep. So actually kind of excited about this. I think you're gonna get two things. You're gonna get multi-account on web, so be able to like click and log out and log into different accounts with a one-click option. And importantly, you can be logged into a different account on web than you are on mobile. So you can use, your personal account on your mobile device and your company account on web, or vice versa, which is something that people have been asking for a while. So we expect that version of the feature to ship soon, hopefully this week if things go well, or early next week. And the thing that I'm really excited about is this sets us up for a couple of big features, which we can launch later this year or maybe early in the next year, which is allowing sign up via web. So you don't have to go through the Apple IAP process, and we'll be able to do something more crypto native, which we're excited about. And directcast on web. So because we can now use passkeys to securely store your mnemonic in, well, not in the browser, but adjacent to the browser, we'll now be able to enable that and setting up your encryption key and all of that. So very excited about this initial feature and the things that it unlocks. Anyone have any questions on this?
Yeah, actually, I do have a question for the web DMs. So it's only gonna it will be only possible if the developer has access to the mnemonic, right? Not the signer.
Yes. Well, actually, let me take a step back. This kind of touches on David's question. Is right now the way DCs work is their Warpcast specific feature. So nobody outside of Warpcast is actually able to use this. It's purely like our backend, our infrastructure feature set up that way. We want to make this a protocol level feature, but the way we're sequencing this is one, get DCs on mobile really, really solid and reliable. And I think we're about to hit there. Two, get DCs on web. And I think after we get that accomplished, then it will be get DCs into the protocol level so that other clients and apps can implement DCs.
Cool. So what's the timeline on that, roughly?
The short answer for all those steps would be very long. I think there's a good chunk of work before we can actually protocolize it and get it out there. So we don't want to commit to a timeline right now because I think realistically it's a fairly difficult piece of infrastructure to build. But I think web directcasts are soon-ish, 1 to 3 months, depending on how testing and implementation goes. And then we'll kind of take a step back and work on the design for DCs on web, which Cassie's already done a lot of thinking about, but I expect that to be a fairly long project.
Awesome.
I
Thanks.
think one thing to just kind of like think about here is, and maybe we've been optimistic in terms of our timelines, is Cassie's just been grinding through this extremely long tail of bugs. And part of it is just, especially Android, like just so much complexity in terms of all the different libraries that are interplay and devices and the way all this stuff happens. And I think we've come to an appreciation for how sophisticated, Signal is in terms of the support for all of those different devices. But also, like, obviously, if you just think about the other people who've done this level of encryption, it's basically just Meta and Apple. Like, that's it. And so it's like there are very few people who are actually implementing the double ratchet to the degree that Cassie and Cassie's basically a one-person team on this. And so I think where we want to get to, and probably a mistake we made last year in terms of moving quickly, is not having DCs be basically 100% reliable, I think hurt the perception of the feature. And so before we kind of commit to like actually getting things out into a protocol, like we need to be hitting a reliability bar that like we are really proud of. And in doing so, I think we'll have solved a lot of like kind of small edge cases that we can then bundle into whatever the design we'd make for the open source. But I think it's just like, want to be just super clear. It is wishful thinking for us to be like, oh, it's coming soon, versus like we want to get it right. And then when we do, we want to be able to stand fully behind it from a support standpoint.
Yep. I think that's a really good framing, Dan. And like one of the things that Cassie's been doing a lot of thinking about and that we've also been considering as we're thinking about opening up DCs as a protocol, one thing to consider is all your messages, all your encrypted messages are going to be publicly available in their encrypted form. This means if there's any vulnerability, any way to decrypt them, everybody has access to the ciphertext and can be operating on them, which is a very different security posture than what Signal or Meta or any of these others have to actually make it truly compatible. And so we really, really, really need to make sure that the encryption works solidly. Otherwise, it's just an open messaging protocol where everybody can read your messages. And that's something we want to be really thoughtful about before we ship. Cool. If there's no other questions on that, we can touch on warps a little bit. So a couple of things that you've probably seen. We're running more experiments with giving people warps. So there's an ongoing 4-week experiment. We're in week 2 right now, where we're giving warps to people who have who post like the most engaged / interesting casts every week. A little bit of heuristics, a little bit of manual selection and curation there. We think it's going pretty well. We'll consider extending it beyond the 4-month window if it continues to go well for the next 2 weeks. The other experiment we ran today to give people warps, This one was for invites. So if you invited somebody and they signed up, you got a certain number of warps. If you invited somebody and they signed up and continued to be active, you got more warps. So it's 10 for invite, 30 for invite and active. And then if you invited somebody and they ended up getting flagged as a spammer by Warpcast, you get minus 600 warps. So, if you invite one spammer for every 20 good users, you're kind of breaking even-ish there. We actually think this worked well. Like, I think people are excited. It unlocks the ability to now connect apps for free without paying on-chain fees. And I think just anecdotally and from data, we've seen more people clicking the connect button to a bunch of apps like Flink and Abora, which has been really cool. So hopefully this is boosting a lot of like actual people playing around with other apps in the ecosystem. The other thing that we're working on is we also want to think about more ways to use warps to do things that benefit Farcaster and benefit the ecosystem. So we've been working on another new feature. I'm not going to announce it yet, but hopefully launching today or tomorrow for another way for people to use warps. So you've heard it here first, and we'll be shipping something soon, and expect more experiments along that axis. That said, if people have any questions about warps or generally what we're doing with the program, now is a great time to ask more questions.
Maybe I'll also just add one thing here because it seems to be a meme, and so you're hearing it from us. There is no benefit to accruing warps and holding them. Like, so we are going to be running as many experiments as we're doing to have people use them. Like that is the point of them. That is why it is a Warpcast feature. That is why they're called warps. Like, and just in terms of like, the point here is to use them. And so if we are unable to convince people of that and actually get people to use them, then the whole thing is not useful. So I think we are going to be actively trying to get people to use their warps, get people to install Farcaster apps, do actions that we think benefit the protocol. They are meant to be used, not held. And there's no secret motive. There's no like, haha, I got you. I told you to use them, but now if you had held them, no, it's like use the warps. And so to the degree that people ask or kind of saying, oh, well, I want to do that, you've heard it from me and Varun, like use warps. That's what the point of having them are.
Yeah. Few questions in the chat. Greg asked, why do some signers take more warps? It's basically gas. We calculate the gas fee for the ongoing operation, and then we charge you some amount. So if you do it when gas is low, sometimes it costs as little as 10 or 20 warps. Gas has been high this last week, so it's gone up to as much as 60. So that's just a natural fluctuation in terms of how that works. Let me see, a lot of questions. Warp is a hyperinflation currency. Nope. Yeah, the right mental model, as Dan said, is kind of to think of them as credit card reward points or equivalent. It's like stuff that you can use to get little things and little utilities in the app, and we're going to be giving them to people that are contributing to the protocol or to Warpcast to keep driving that. One other question earlier on was, can I invite a user and help them onboard for free with warps? It's a great idea. It's something we want to do. We don't support it yet, but we would love to support it in the future. But if you're trying to do that in the meantime, I think Greg has actually built a cool tool where you can prepay for somebody's invite and have them join. Not the same thing as using your warps, but it's a way for you to invite a friend. And Dan just posted the link in the chat. It's gift.fcsdr.xyz. Let me see what the question is. Does the team see a world where warps become decentralized or more as a short-term way to take actions on the protocol? Very explicitly, we have no plans, and we explicitly do not want to make warps something that exists or are usable in any form outside of Warpcast. So no token, no on-chain representation, nothing. They will purely be a Warpcast-specific way to incentivize people to do things on Warpcast, and we'll keep adding more and more things on that axis for people to do with them so that they're useful. But we have specifically no plans to make them a token or anything in that domain.
And maybe just to add to that, just so people can understand from a developer perspective, we are trying to use a kind of accounting system essentially for ourselves that allows us to be App Store compliant, allows people to do on-chain actions, right? So remember pre-warps, people were complaining on 99 cents or whatever. As soon as you add warps now, it's like, oh, okay. So that either you decide warps are valuable and you want to spend the 99 cents, or now great, like I got this thing from Warpcast for just using the app. Now I can actually go test out an app. And so I think what we're really trying to drive for here is you don't have to have any crypto to be able to do things that are happening on chain within the Farcaster ecosystem that we think are benefit for the ecosystem. Same reason we're using passkeys, same reason we have in-app purchases for signups. Like if we're trying to significantly grow QDAO, right, 1000x, like that would be amazing for everybody. We have to have a system where people don't even need to know anything about bridging some ETH to Optimism to then be able to go do a signer. And to be clear, other clients can take a crypto native approach, and we may actually add some crypto native stuff for web because that's outside the App Store. But I think we're really trying to drive for is just make all of this complexity as simple as possible for people while still giving everyone the power of this decentralized ecosystem. And so I think the one ask I would have for everyone on this call is that is what the whole point of Warps is, to actually encourage people to explore the broader ecosystem within Farcaster.
Another question was possible to have warp budget for devs who test Farcaster IOing, I assume it's signing, in their apps. We want to make this better. So I think we're going to launch one tactical feature that makes this a little better, and then maybe another feature that we should talk about. So the tactical feature is we might let some folks like developers like sideload warps, so you can like pre-fund your account and then go and like do a bunch of operations and transactions. It's probably a little bit away because there's a reasonable amount of complexity to implementing that, but that's something that we want to do on the roadmap so devs can easily like take actions without having to go through the whole in-app purchase every time. The other thing that we've been thinking about is how do we just make it easier to test signers, because the flow is kind of painful. So one thing that would be helpful for folks building signers and who find themselves going through that flow often and having to pay every time as a developer, what is there a feature that we could build for you that would make it less likely that you need to do something on chain, and you could test the behavior that you're doing in some sort of simulated way that would be useful to you? And if you have ideas or thoughts on that, feel free to DM me. We'd love to build as many tools as possible so that you don't have to take actual on-chain actions just to test behavior, just maybe once or twice as a smoke test to make sure that everything is working before you ship something. Okay, but feel free to DM. I don't want to turn this into a brainstorm because that's a much longer conversation, and happy to ship something to make that experience better for folks. Can we give warps away to other existing or new users? I think it's a great idea. We were considering it on the roadmap. We don't have a definite timeline for that yet, but that's something we want to ship at some point. Perhaps warp should have an expiry date of a year, or just so people get that they're not some kind of long-term token to accrue and collect. From David. Yeah, I like that idea. It's interesting. Currently they don't expire. Once you get them, they're yours and you can use them for as long as you like. But if we find that they're getting hoarded and people aren't using them, then I think some kind of decay might actually be useful to nudge people to spend them. Cool. Any last questions? I'll actually open this up to broadly anything about Farcaster or Warpcast at this point. This will be the last topic we talk about before we wrap the meeting up.
Okay, man, I'll go first.
Go ahead. Okay, I can go first. Just wanted to resurface the topic about embedding casts within other casts. Warpcast currently embeds URLs. It would be better if we can move to a system where we're embedding casts. We have that support at the protocol level. Just need to make that change at the client level. Yeah.
Yep. I think that makes sense. Curious, in your priority stack of the stuff that we're fixing for you relative to Replicator and Hubble, like where would you put this as a sort of pain point, given that you're talking to a bunch of the devs who want this feature?
Yeah, so generally what happens is devs have to resolve the cast based on the username and the first six, which is a URL. It is different from just looking up based on the cast hash itself. So a lot of the things with regards to caching, etc., don't work in the API stack as well as they would if we were just looking it up based on that. So it's more of an optimization, I would say. It's not blocking functionality, but yeah, would be
cool.
good for optimization.
It's something that's on our roadmap. I just wanted to know where to bump it relative to the other things that we're working on, but we definitely want to get to it.
Okay, I'm in, if that's fine. Congrats on shipping the views. They're really cool. And obviously, I want to ask about an API and the plan for making views visible outside of Forecast.
Dan, do you want to take this one or should I?
You can take it.
So right now, I don't think we have any immediate plans for making views visible outside of Warpcast. Curious what you would use it for if we did ship something like that.
Not a priority for me at all. It's just, curiosity, because I wouldn't mind adding them to my own client, but I don't need it.
Okay, yeah, I think it's something that we've considered. I think we've gone back and forth on like whether we want to expose this. I think it's to Rish's point, I was just going to say that it's like trying to get to a global state of views across clients is just going to be very messy, very gameable, very unstable. So I think it's like it's not going to be very useful for a lot of things, and so we didn't want to expose something that's going to end up being a little messy. We'll have a think on if we can do it in like a structured way that's actually useful, but right now our gut sort of says same POV as like sharing spam lists and things like that. Like it's actually useful for each client to have their own implementation and not be sharing a kind of global POV on some of this data.
Is there any timeline on having an API for the channel follower data?
That's a great question. So the way we're treating channels in Warpcast right now is we're still treating them as an experiment where we're running a bunch of different updates to how channels work to make sure we're dialed in on the right feature. I think where we are frankly with channels is it's a feature that clearly works for people. Like over 60% of our casts happen in channels today, but the surface area of the feature isn't fully dialed in yet. I think there's a lot of stuff we might change about how channels work in the next month or two. And the reason for the reason why I'm saying all of that is I think before we ossify something into the protocol and say like, hey, this is how channel follows are represented in the protocol, for example, we wanted to get to a point where we are like 95% confident that Warpcast won't change the way it shows or views or operates channels for the next year. And I don't think we're quite at that point yet. So we want to run a few more experiments with like tweaks to channels, tweaks to how follows work, tweaks to how the UI works, before we actually say, okay, this is ready to ossify into the protocol and we can actually publish it. The good news is I think it's actually fairly easy to publish the channel follows into the protocol once it's done. The follow type is actually quite easily extensible to mark like a channel follow. And so I think we'll be able to get that shipped fairly quickly once we're confident that this is stable.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, so one, I know there's a question on view counts and then channels. So the goal with view counts is, I spend a lot of time talking to people like, why do you use Twitter versus not, like, or Farcaster? It's like, how can we get people to use it? And I think that there's a huge population of people who they don't believe two things. One, they don't believe that there's enough reach on Farcaster. And I think that I want to show that there is actually meaningful reach. It's not, they have a preformed opinion in the last few years that Farcaster is small. So the numbers aren't as big as Twitter, but like I actually think when you start to get into the 1,000 views, like that actually is meaningful to people. That number feels important. I think the second thing is people don't believe as much as I try to tell everyone, posting in a channel gives you actually more page views. Like we've looked at the data, like we're pushing it from an algorithmic standpoint in the home feed, but people continue to put things that they think are important. They put them in the home feed. And so I actually want to be able to start showing people when I say, hey, you should consider posting in channels more, like, no, like you actually get more distribution. And there are going to be some people who say, hey, like it's too much work. Fine. So we can work on making that easier. Or I just didn't feel like posting in a channel. We're never going to get that. But I actually want to be able to change the overall macro of, there are a lot of people who are actually trying to build an audience. And in doing so, I want them to have clear data and specifically around channels. And so that's really what the views are for, is just to actually slowly nudge behavior in one direction. And then I think that the second point on channels generally is we have yet to figure out a way to, how do you get channels to a critical threshold where they're just like amazing. And is that a lead? Is that you get the right group of people? I think Nouns is probably the most interesting channel in that there is actually no real lead. Noun 40 is kind of the spiritual leader, but actually explicitly didn't want to be a lead, and is being used as a tool for a community. And we have yet to replicate that with any other community at that level of intensity. And so I'm trying to spend a lot of time talking to folks who have these types of communities that are on chain, and we've done it successfully within like kind of Farcaster. So it's like Founders is an example of a channel I think is doing well. Memes obviously has plenty of liquidity, and Johnny is doing a good job as a lead. But if we approach it from the lens of we need to grow DAO for the protocol so that everyone can benefit by an order of multiple magnitude, we have to crack the primitive that is going to actually start to bring large amounts of people into the protocol. And we're kind of nibbling at the edges of this, but we have yet to find that kind of one seam or that one path in the idea maze that we feel really confident about, then saying, like, to Varun's point, let's really drive this into the protocol and take a long-term bet on this version of the
Yep. Any other questions from folks? I'm just catching up on the chat. There was a question about the desktop app, the link being broken. Chad, if you wouldn't mind DMing me, let me just drop my Telegram here, and just send me a screenshot of the email that you got. Basically, the desktop app right now is installable as a PWA. So when you're in the browser, either in Chrome, Safari, or Edge, you can click a button on the top right. It will install the web app as a desktop app, complete with an icon and your dock and all the nice stuff. But if that link is broken, we have a tutorial on how to do it. We should go fix that tutorial. So just if you can let me know, send me a screenshot of the email that you got, we'll go investigate that. Okay, cool. Any other questions? I'll give it like 10 seconds before moving on to shout outs and wrapping the meeting. All right, great. So the one shout out from everyone on the Farcaster team, I know there's like migrations come with a ton of work, and we literally changed all of the contracts and ripped up all of the stuff and moved everything over. And we really, really appreciate how supportive everyone has been. Like when I DM'd everyone about this migration and said like, hey, it's going to be more work for you guys, literally every single person was like, no problem, I can upgrade, happy to do this. And I know for many of you, this is a hobby or a side project or the thing that you're working on. So we really appreciate how supportive you are. And that's what lets us move really quickly and keep shipping things fast. So we appreciate the energy, and we will keep trying to ship things quickly. Awesome. With that, I think we reached the end of our meeting today. Let's wrap here. If anyone has any more bugs, one thing that would be tremendously useful to us is making them GitHub tickets. I think we've just received so many reports for protocol. This is for protocol level stuff. For protocol level bugs and replicator bugs and things like that, if you can make them tickets in the GitHub, we're much more likely to get to them and less likely to let them slip through the cracks. If you're still busy and you just want to DM me, that's totally fine. Just know that if something's really painful and you take the time to make it a GitHub ticket, we're much more likely to get it done quickly, especially if you have a repro. All right, that's all for this week, folks. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.